So I want to explain this Jewish concept that I like, and it's called the sin of distancing. It's something I have down really well. And explain it this way. In the Bible, there's a story of Joseph. Do you remember the Joseph story where he's the youngest of the brothers, and they found out the youngest child is always the most obnoxious. And so the other brothers, they drive him up a wall. So in this very sad part, they decide to kill him. But then they decide, no, we'll just sell him into slavery. And Joseph was obnoxious. But the sin there is that, he's driving us up a wall. Then rather than deal with the fact that I've got to deal with my emotional issues about this person, I'll just distance myself from him. I'll get rid of him. And one of the lead brothers who did it was this guy named Judah. So it tells the story of Joseph being sold into slavery, and then the Bible jumps to Judah as a middle-aged man. And Judah is arrogant, but life hits him. He loses a son, and that hurts him. And then he gets into this, it's a Tamar story. He gets into this situation where his daughter-in-law helps him see just how arrogant he truly is. And in Hebrew, it keeps playing with the words, please see this. And what he really sees is just how arrogant he was. So he has kind of this, the beginning of him becoming a holy man is when he sees how arrogant he is. And then it jumps forward to when the brothers now meet Joseph again, except now he's ruling in Egypt. And there's this great line that I just love, where Judah sees Joseph. Judah, who threw him in the well, sold him off to slavery. Judah sees him, and it says, he approached Joseph and came closer to himself and closed the distance. Why does it say that? I mean, it says he approached Joseph, but then it says he came closer to himself. And the Hebrew is just really beautiful. He closed the distance. And what it means is this: as long as he committed the sin of distancing, of if I have a problem with you, I just shut you down, a wall goes up, I ignore you, that's a sin of distancing. But Judah, as long as Judah was distant to himself, he couldn't approach another person. So when it says he closed the distance, he came closer to himself, Judah came closer over the years to what Judah meant to be, rather than just closing people off. It's just beautiful poetry. And then he can finally approach his brother when he becomes really a person of love. And his brother, Joseph, he comes down from the throne, doesn't remain distant, even though he was forced to be distant from his father, his land, his family. It's Joseph who comes down and embraces him and says, I am Joseph, your brother. And so the sin of distancing is that as long as we're distant to really our true humanity, we're also distant from all our brothers, from other people. And the idea is that the sin of distancing is that it's hard to love a long distance away. And people have a way of distancing other people. And close up, you start to love people. And even take this example. There's a child suffering starvation in the world right now somewhere. But to be honest, I can't get emotionally involved, upset with that somewhere. But if it was right here in our assembly, I know all you people would rush to help this child. The closer you are, the more your humanity is evoked. And so if you distance people and create this wall, then what really happens is you're cutting off your own humanity. When you distance other people, where you're really losing is yourself. That's a sin of distancing. And so the lesson is, it's hard to love people a long ways away. So they've actually did these studies too, studies years ago, everybody was crammed into one house. You know, you had 6 kids and everybody had, and your grandparents were there, and you couldn't just get away. And that creates this friction. When you're rubbing up against other people, it creates this friction. So you kind of have to deal with your own problems. Now with really big homes like me, I love it. Don't get me wrong. I live by myself. There's no friction in my house. But when you live with another person, you realize, wait a minute, you have some problems. Or even like this other study about cars. This is a bizarre one. The bigger your car, seriously, the bigger your car, the less likely you are to notice pedestrians. And the reason why these cars, they're designed to keep you safe, and you're alone in this cabin, you're safe from the road and everybody else. But the more distance you feel from other people, the less you notice them. Strange thing. Even this other thing, another study, where you could take 2 strangers, and I forget the exact amount of time, but if you take 2 strangers, and now I'm going to embarrass you, and you have this thing, I'm sure you guys have seen it, where you stare in each other's eyes for 30 seconds. You know what happens? A relationship. People test out that they care more for other just by staring at each other for like 30 seconds. Anybody else see that study besides me? One good person over there. So we're going to try that tonight. Everybody turn and just kidding. But like if you stare into somebody's eyes, you can't commit the sin of distancing. You show up. And so I just find it amazing. But the problem is there's this price that you pay the way we arrange our lives where we're more distant from other people. Now, you don't have to go to the bank. You can do it online. You don't have to even shop. You can do that just online. And you miss the teller, the clerk, and there's the good part is there's no friction. The bad part is you're distancing yourself from yourself, not just from other people, but from yourself. That's the strange part. And the problem is you lose yourself. The good part is that you have less friction. But then, like Joseph, you've distanced yourself from other people. And the emotional life, the true emotional life, is that we have friction with other people. And that's a good thing. It helps us find our way back to one another. So, one of the good reasons for having a parish is that if you belong to a parish, and you can quote me on this, the thing about belonging to a parish is that people are annoying. I'm serious. People are annoying. Like, this group wants that, and this group wants this, and the diocese wants this, and you have to have this insurance form. All those things are kind of annoying. But they draw people together so that you're not distant from one another. And so the Jewish saying, this deals with this idea of distancing other people, is that the Jewish saying is a whole heart is a broken heart. That if you want to keep your heart safe, all you have to do is distance yourself from all other people. And then, you won't have any friction. You won't have any problems. But there's something wrong with your heart. A whole heart is a broken heart. Judah can finally embrace his brother because over a lifetime of having his heart broken. And all the saints of the Old Testament, they have their heart broken eventually over and over again. And the good part is that's when it becomes whole. And they find their way back to one another. And I love that. And so, if you want to, the heart thing I think is beautiful. And then, so, I'm trying to think how to describe this. So God commands that we gather together as a community, and we offer what's called a korban in Hebrew. A korban in Hebrew, you would translate it sacrifice, but technically it means a coming closer to God, coming closer to each other, a coming closer to our true selves. So here at every Mass, we offer a korban, a sacrifice. In other words, we learn the way of love by coming closer to each other. The problem is, Like, as a country western song says, and I love this line from the country western song, God is great, beer is good, and people are crazy. It's true. No, they've studied it. But I'm crazy, you're crazy, but God asks us to commit a korban, a sacrifice together, so we find our way to one another. So in this odd way, it reminds me of, took a long time to explain that, reminds me of the feast of the baptism of the Lord. Because the feast of the baptism of the Lord deals with this idea of the sin of distancing. Because when Jesus shows up to the Jordan, John the Baptist says, why would I baptize you? And Christ is the sacrament of baptism. Why would Christ need to be baptized? And actually, the baptism of the Lord in the Jordan, it's the opposite of baptism in this way. It's the opposite of baptism. The sacrament of baptism is us being immersed in the life of God. Jesus being baptized in the Jordan is Christ being immersed in us. Christ seeking the solidarity with us in the muddy, crazy, mixed up lives of human beings. God is not distancing himself from human beings. Quite the opposite. In the Jordan, it's not the sacrament of baptism. The Jordan River celebrates God's desire to be immersed in our craziness. So the idea is that the solidarity. So if you want to find the way of holiness is not saying, I'm going to go to some mountaintop and be, alone by myself with God. That may be beautiful, but that's not the way of holiness. The way of holiness is the baptism of the Lord, to be mixed up into the crazy life of other human beings. So when people say, you get this all the time, oh, my idea of worship is I like to go hike in the mountains. That's beautiful. But that also commits a sin of distancing. Being outside of community, there's no friction that makes you really face yourself, become your true human being. Our idea of worship is not being alone by myself where there's no friction. Quite the opposite. It's offering a korban. So Christ comes to show us the way of holiness by mixing his life in our crazy lives, where we can find our way back to one another. What we do here tonight on the Feast of the Baptism of the Lord is we offer a korban, and we want to become closer to Christ, who wants to be immersed in our crazy life. After that, we're like Joseph and Judah. We found our way back to one another because we've closed the distance from ourselves. And so together, let us stand and offer our prayers.